Hello everyone, this is Bob and Threadbare, and welcome back to Weaving Worlds. For today's video, we'll be taking a look at a species, or really more of a species concept, that has appeared time and time again in science fiction stories: parasites. By that, I specifically mean any creature that can in some way inhabit a human and has its own independent intelligence. Not all parasites are enemies of humanity, but most of them are, at least to some degree, gross. What is a parasite? The worst thing about parasites is probably the fact that they're real. There are, in fact, animals that can invade the human body through ingestion or skin contact or other means, and which then consume our flesh or blood, or even eat the food right out of our stomachs. Bacteria and viruses do similar things, of course, but germs act on a microscopic level. We can't see them with our naked eyes, and so there's a certain level of detachment between what they do and what we experience. Parasites, on the other hand, are visible. They're big enough to touch, to manipulate, to pry out with our bare fingers. Technically, not every parasite is macroscopic, but I think you get my point. There's a certain amount of instinctual disgust you feel from seeing a parasite that you don't feel from looking at a bacterium or a virus. Our lizard brain doesn't know it should be afraid of fuzzy ovals or spiky orbs, but it does know it should avoid tapeworms and maggots. This revulsion is an essential aspect of using parasites in science fiction. A parasite should look disgusting, even if you don't plan on making it villainous or harmful. Not only is it an alien or a manufactured organism that doesn't have to follow any rules about Earth evolution, but you're using this creature to provoke a visceral reaction from the audience, and that reaction is disgust. So, get disgusting. The Invaders from Within. Normal Earth parasites are bad enough on their own, but science fiction parasites can add whole new layers of horror. A normal parasite just wants nutrients and an opportunity to reproduce, but science fiction parasites can take over their hosts, altering their brains or taking control of their bodies without the brain's input. A few real-life parasites can do that too, but they don't really work on anything more complex than an insect. On top of that, real-life parasites are never more complex than the creatures they infect. That would defeat the point. After all, why bother using another organism's biology to sustain yourself if you could do it better yourself? However, science fiction doesn't have that restriction. A science fiction parasite could be as intelligent or more intelligent than its host. And as such, it won't just infect and degrade its host's mind, it'll hijack it and take over, becoming the dominant personality. Or maybe it'll merge with its host and become someone different, someone new. Or it might just be a cordyceps that works on humans. Up to you. Parasites as zombie makers. As I just mentioned, cordyceps is a genus of fungus that grows on living insects and can alter their host's behavior to make them more likely to infect other insects. In some respects, this is actually something that bacteria and viruses can do to humans. By causing runny noses and coughs in their hosts, respiratory diseases make it much more likely for fellow humans or other mammals to come into contact with infectious microbes. But what if a disease's symptoms aren't something that just happens, but something that takes over? In The Last of Us, cordyceps is reimagined as a fungus that can do to humans what it does to insects, and it happens so suddenly that it becomes a zombie apocalypse that destroys civilization. In the Half-Life series, one of the invading aliens is called a head crab, because it looks vaguely like a crab and it can latch onto a person's head, kill them, and cause their corpse to walk around and attack the living. Ultimately, this sort of parasite is basically a different flavor of zombie, which I've talked about before, but the difference is that a parasitic zombie has something latched onto them which is visible and distinctly inhuman. Parasites as invaders. In the Stargate series, the main villains are called the Goa'uld. The Goa'uld look human, but that's because we're looking at their hosts. The true aliens are snake-shaped parasites that infect humans by wrapping themselves around the spinal column and overriding their host's brains. The Goa'uld then used this control and their advanced technology to dominate early humans and to pose as gods and monarchs. They also abducted humans and spread them throughout their galactic empire to use as host bodies and slaves. For a different kind of invader and a different kind of parasite, there's Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The titular Body Snatchers are plant-like pods, and while they don't infect humans, they do kidnap humans and use them to create duplicate pod people, a process that eventually kills the human so that only the pod person remains. It's not biologically parasitic, but as far as literary devices go, it's close enough that I'm counting it. Anyway, the reason the pod people are taking over Earth isn't because they want to conquer or destroy humanity, it's because they want their own species to thrive. And if that means humanity goes extinct, then so be it. Parasites as infiltrators. Instead of being obvious zombie makers or conquerors, what if a parasite is secret and stealthy? What if there's no visible indication of an infection, and parasites take advantage of that to hide among normal people for some nefarious purpose? The xenomorph of the Alien series qualifies as an infiltrator, though it only does so for a specific time period. While the moment of infection and the end result are very obvious, for the time in between, the victim can speak and act normally, seeming for all the world like nothing is wrong. Maybe a parasite in your setting can emphasize this incubation period, and monsters don't come bursting out until maybe a year later, long enough for several people to get infected, before monsters start bursting out of their stomachs all at once. Then there's the alien from the Thing. Each cell of the Thing can independently infect a living host and completely take it over without altering the host's appearance or memories. It can transform a host's appearance, but it doesn't have to. It's not exactly a parasite because it attacks on a microscopic level and it takes over its host completely, but much like the Body Snatchers, it fills a very similar literary role. The point of an infiltrator parasite is that you never know who you can trust, and that includes people who are normally completely trustworthy. Parasites as a communal intelligence. In the video game System Shock 2, there are worm parasites that attach to a host's brain just like the Goa'uld, but unlike the Goa'uld, each parasite isn't uniquely intelligent. Instead, every worm is psychically connected to every other worm, and they use the brains of their hosts to create a communal intelligence. Each host has a certain amount of independence, at least at first, but eventually they become nothing more than fleshy vestiges that power the greater mind. The Thing also counts as a communal intelligence. While every part of the Thing can move and act independently, they usually coordinate as if one mind, one consciousness were guiding it. That's how it knows when to hide, who else is infected, and what to do while no one else is watching. Its goal isn't to simply infect every person in the base, its goal is to create a spaceship that will let it, or some significant part of it, escape the base. So what this aspect does is, it makes the parasites even more alien by having their minds work differently than humans, and it lets them cooperate better than humans, and thus become that much more dangerous. Parasites as symbiotes. What if having a parasite isn't a bad thing? What if instead of replacing the host's mind, a parasite adds to it, improves it? What if a parasite could be a source of superpowers? Much like parasites, the idea of symbiotes is also true to life. A variety of bacteria live in the human digestive system, and they've evolved to help us process the food we eat. In the Star Trek setting, a species called the Trill is capable of carrying a symbiont that doesn't really have its own personality so much as it stores the memories and personalities of previous hosts. This collective knowledge is then passed on to a new host when the old one dies, and so the hosts of old symbionts become wise beyond their years without losing their sense of self. At least not fully. In Marvel comic books, Venom is a black liquid that's independently intelligent, but confused with a human host to give them strength, agility, and a few other powers. Venom can influence its host and sometimes control their body, but it can also talk with its host and make its own decisions. In fact, it can do a lot of things, because it's a popular comic book character that's been around for almost 40 years, so there have been a lot of writers and interpretations over the years. There have also been a lot of other symbiotes, and each one has its own personality and foibles. The symbiotic angle gives you room to make parasites something more than just villains, but then even a heroic parasite will still provoke an instinctive reaction of disgust from the audience. And you shouldn't try and fight that either. After all, why bother using a parasite if you don't want it to be disgusting? Thanks for joining me again for today's journey into Weaving Worlds. Please like, share, and subscribe because that raises my visibility here on YouTube. Check out my other stuff if you have some time, support me on Patreon if you have some money, and I hope I'll see you again for the next video.